Hello, everybody. This is Greg O'Curry Crow getting back to some of you um, with some extra questions we received after the talk I just gave. And so I'm going to try and answer those. And thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. The first one was basically there's this new study going on between NOAA and Mystic Aquarium where they're looking at environmental and anthropogenic stressors uh, through research on 5 new captive bred belugas once they arrive. And they wanted to know whether the person wanted to know whether we might be involved in that, even though there might be significant differences in behavior between captive and wild. I think this is a great study, potentially, certainly, and it's true. There may be some differences obviously between the captive situation and the wild, but there's so much we can learn sometimes from animals under more controlled environments. So like you, I'm definitely looking forward to that study. Another listener asked, what was the main cause of death for belugas? And this is actually quite an interesting one, mainly because we don't really know, perhaps, because a lot of the time these animals are far away from shore and beyond the sight of scientists. I would suspect, nutritional stress, disease, predation, some of the natural factors, certainly are major mortality factors. One interesting thing about belugas, however, is they're prone to ice entrapments. And I think that, along with narwhals, kind of sets them apart. And that's a very unusual source or mortality factor where hundreds and sometimes thousands of whales can perish in rapidly forming ice. Okay, another question was, how much has the water temperature changed in the Arctic? Well, since the 70s, I think the estimate now is the average water temperature has changed about 2.3, 2.4 degrees Celsius, which may not sound like a lot, but actually is indeed a lot. And the speed at which that change has occurred is probably unprecedented. Here we go. Another one. What does Greg think is the most exciting area of his research? Wow. Well, definitely I'm very excited about the work we do with genetics because it really is like a mystery. And you really don't know what you're going to find. And once you find something using molecular tools, you feel like you're let into a secret. And I think that's very exciting. Also, I think a lot of the telemetry work we've done in recent years has really been very exciting, not just working with the animals themselves, but seeing where they go. But I would have to say the most exciting thing for me is just to sit and observe whales. I'm still very much a notebook and pencil kind of natural historian. And so I think sometimes just the privilege of observing these animals in the wild is probably the most exciting for me. Here's another question. Do you know if the whales like any other music, any of our music, Mozart, rock, etc.? Well, actually, yes. And indeed, there's been some really cool videos. You'll see them online where, for example, at Mystic Aquarium, there's a whale there, a bit of a rock star, and there's people have come, mariachi bands, I think, and brass bands have come, and these whales definitely tune in and are very aware and are very interested in music. So I think that's really a very cool thing about belugas. Another question somebody asked was, what country threatens them the most? That is a difficult one, and I think partly because there are large parts of the belugas range that we really do not have a lot of time on the ground and a lot of research. There's big parts of the Russian Arctic, for example, where I think we would like to probably spend more time. I know there's a lot of Russian scientists doing excellent work there, so it's really hard to say. I think in many ways, all of us potentially through some of our activities are threatening these animals. Sad to say. Did you run into any problems when trying to tag beluga whales? Well, yes, many in fact. And tagging whales is a very humbling experience. At no time do you ever feel you're completely in control. And I think that's a very important lesson and something to be aware of. In many ways, I feel we are let by the whales to almost tag them. I know that sounds a little odd, but we've run into various logistical problems. Obviously, we're always most concerned with animal health and the safety and security of everybody on the team. And so, you just have to be prepared, I guess, for every eventuality and be able to make good decisions at critical times. Okay, here's another one. Is there a specific animal species that is close to extinction due to the loss of Arctic sea ice that you are concerned about? And if so, how would you go about researching its behavior and adaptation? Excellent question. I think there's a lot of focus on the more iconic species, polar bears, whales. I'm very fortunate to work both on polar bears and on beluga whales and what have you. Animals that tend to be at the apex of food webs and certainly get a lot of attention and deserve it. But there are a lot of other species that we're concerned about. There's some species of birds, for example, that have very specialized nesting requirements. For example, Kittless murrelet requires glacial ice, which is rapidly retreating. And we can't forget, critical species throughout the food web, right down to zooplankton and phytoplankton as well, of course. So for me, I am quite concerned about marine mammals in general, maybe polar bears and belugas in particular, and bowhead whales as well, I would say. But overall, it's the entire ecosystem we need to be concerned about. 14, is caviar threatening to them? Well, now that is a very interesting question, and I know where it comes from. And this question comes from beluga caviar, which in fact comes from a fish, a very large fish, a sturgeon called beluga. And sometimes people might even confuse the two, but there is a relationship between the two, and that's the name. It comes from the Russian bieli, which means white. And so you have this very large light-colored fish, and then you obviously have this very white whale, so both beluga. White is something, that word is in other words, like Belarus, which is obviously in the news these days, and that's white Russia. Since you started your research, what has it been, to your knowledge, the biggest negative effects to the whales with the ice melting? That's a very good question. I think since I began, what I'm most aware of is how changing sea ice might be affecting their ability to come close to shore in the summers, late spring, where they often molt, where they nurse their young, where certain feeding patterns and feeding behavior goes. And so that's what I'm most aware of. Now, a lot of the satellite telemetry, which is very exciting, it's sort of telling us how maybe their movements further offshore are changing. And so there's a lot of exciting work coming out of many countries on the movements of these animals and their diving patterns in relation to changing sea ice. So I would say general behavioral shifts in these animals is what I've seen. Now, there's a lot of other research going on looking at, the actual effects on physiology and body condition and health. And so there's actually a lot of work going on right now to try and understand that exact question of the impacts of sea ice loss. Do you have any indication that belugas might mate for life? I don't. This is something we're sort of assuming beluga whales may in fact not mate for life. That an individual female or a male may have, over the course of its long reproductive life, mate with several other individuals. We think the mating system for males, is certainly pretty dynamic, and females probably do not have a lot of mate fidelity over time, but we don't know. And Certainly, a lot of the genetic work we've shown has indicated that a mother that has produced a number of calves, that they have different fathers. But I think that would be a really interesting question to get into more detail. And so with that, I think those are all the questions I got. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for your interest in beluga whales and your questions. And please keep in touch with us on our website. And you'll see there that those of you who may be interested, there's also a crowdfunding project that we've just launched with Florida Atlantic University. And so you might want to check that out too. And thank you very much.